Hello and a very warm welcome to Public Forum. Today we talk about the landmark deal signed between the so-called P5+1 powers, that is the US, UK, France, Russia, China plus Germany and Iran, to curb the Iranian nuclear program. The breakthrough was reached in Vienna after hectic parleys between the two sides. Under the agreement, Iran will limit its nuclear activity in return for the lifting of international economic sanctions. There is also agreement over nuclear inspections, but the lifting of an arms embargo has been delayed. The deal that has been described as historic by Iran caps a decade of on-off negotiations and marks the beginning of the end of one of the world's most serious crises. But it has also angered Iran's opponents, who have described it as a bad mistake of historic proportions. So what impact will the agreement have on the political landscape of the Middle East, and how will it impact Iran's foreign relations and the global economy? We discuss. And to discuss the Iran nuclear deal and its implications, we have with us in the studios an eminent panel. Please welcome Ambassador Shilkant Sharma. He is former India's representative to the IAEA. Welcome to the program, Ambassador Sharma. Sitting next to him is Professor Rajesh Rajgopalan from the School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Welcome to the program, Professor Rajgopalan. Sitting next to him is Sanjay Kapoor, editor, Hard News. Welcome to the program, Mr. Kapoor. We are also joined by Samuel Rajiv, Associate Fellow with the Institute of Defence Studies and Analysis. Welcome to the program, Mr. Rajiv. Ambassador Sharma, if we could touch upon some of the details of this deal. President Obama has said that all pathways to a nuclear weapon for Iran have been blocked. How do you look at it?
President Obama is right. It is a historic deal, not only for non-proliferation, but for the triumph of diplomacy, because this whole thing has been done through diplomatic engagement over the past, very intensively over the past 23 months, but almost for a decade. And the agreement which Iran has accepted, the Joint Cooperative Program of Action, Comprehensive Program of Action, it spells out in great detail. The annexes are the most exhaustive. They can remind you of the kind of treaties which they did in the Cold War between Soviet Union and the US, the INF Treaty or the START Treaty between Reagan and Gorbachev, where everything was spelled out. Same way, President Obama said that they asked him whether they could trust Iran. So he said that, look, when you write down things clearly, then we can expect them to conform to it.
Right.
And that's why the whole agreement, 159 pages, is a very exhaustive thing. It blocks their paths to nuclear weapons, puts them under very strict, regular and close monitoring, inspection, verification by the IAEA, which is something which is again unprecedented in the annals of non-proliferation.
Right.
That kind of an agreement. And the most important part is that Iran has accepted this. President Rouhani, when he was speaking on the 14th, he described the deal in terms of dignity and politeness and in terms of the forbearance and patience as hallmarks of Iranian culture. But he gave a pride of place to lifting of sanctions. He described these sanctions as unsuccessful in beating Iran's resolve,
right,
but effective in troubling people.
Right.
So, if you were to look at his address, he was understated in explaining the kind of agreement, reduction and restraints that he has accepted, and the kind of nuclear capability that he had built up,
right,
which has been bargained now for lifting of sanctions. So it's a very intricate deal, and the time required for it, including the last 8 days of hard negotiations, shows that both sides were working very, very intimately and with fine detail. I'll give you one example. For instance, if you go through the annexes and the joint and the JCPOA, it has a sentence that which has a disclaimer that whatever has been agreed is not precedent setting.
Okay.
because the kind of stuff which Iran has agreed, it cannot be replicated with other countries.
Okay.
So, Iran, as President Rouhani said, has maintained that it has never been for nuclear weapons.
Right.
And it was, whatever it was developing was its right under the NPT. And because of the sanctions and because of the suspicions, they are willing to allay those suspicions.
Right.
So, they are willing to go as much as they want. So, I find that in April, when the parameters were issued, the Americans issued fact sheets, both White House and State Department. These fact sheets were found to be very different from what Iranians said.
Okay.
And the skeptics then pounced upon it, saying, look, what you are saying the Iranians don't accept.
Right.
But when you go through the details, you find every bit of those fact sheets which the US issued has been taken on board.
Okay.
So, that shows the extent of Iranian large-heartedness in accepting these things.
Okay.
And it also goes to strengthen the IAEA, which as the Director General of the IAEA said, that by December he hopes to confirm what Iran has been saying,
Right.
especially about the possible military dimensions. And if that happens, the plume on the IAEA feather would be stronger than what the Nobel Prize was a decade back, because it is the multilateral organization where all the major powers have accepted to give it a kind of a role,
Right.
and which Iran has accepted, again through cooperative negotiations, no coercion.
Okay. And do you think the fact that the negotiations took place in Vienna, which happens to be the IAEA headquarters, that had some significance?
Well, Vienna, is known to be the place for diplomacy from the time of Metternich, and having been ambassador there, I know the place has a certain historic charm about it, and that Coburg Palace, you'll have reams written about it when time permits. It's a and the Viennese go out of their way, like President Fischer himself was there to meet these guys and their foreign ministers and the Viennese foreign office. So, Austria is a country known for this kind of stuff, and the IAEA setting.
Right.
And when the IAEA General Conference in 50s decided on the location of it, Dr. Bhabha was the chairman of the conference, and there was a tie between Vienna and Geneva, and Dr. Bhabha accepted Vienna because of his penchant for Western classical music, and Vienna is the center of Western classical music. So, that's another advantage of having served there.
All right. Professor Rajgopalan, how do you view this particular deal and the kind of inspections regime that has been put in place? We are told this deal represents the most vigorous inspection and verification regime by far ever negotiated.
I think this deal has a lot of promise, but it is not finished. I mean, I think the Iranian nuclear issue is going to be with us for some time, because what it does is it postpones some of the key problems with the Iranian nuclear program. What we have seen in the deal is basically the Iranians and the Western countries and sort of the P6, as it were, accept a set of propositions with regard to how to proceed. But the problem is that there are a lot of issues that have to do partly with verification, but also partly with Iranian compliance.
Right.
Ambassador Sharma talked about the fact that the PMD, the possible military dimensions of the Iranian nuclear program, which is the suspicion that they have been building, or they have been attempting to build nuclear weapons, that it should be resolved by the end of this year. But this was supposed to have been resolved by August 2014, according to the original. When the negotiations started, Iran said that they would settle this by August 2014, and we are here a year later, and it's still not been resolved. So maybe there is nothing to it. Maybe there is something to it. We don't know. I mean, there are all sorts of accusations back and forth about the Iranian nuclear weapons program. So that remains to be seen. So October 15th is when they have to settle this. By December, the IAEA has to come out with its report about whether it's been settled. There is a lot of arms controllers in Washington and the Obama White House, which basically seems to be not particularly interested in what Iran did in the past and wants to look forward. And so they may possibly overlook even if Iran does not come up with a full explanation of the PMD issue.
Okay.
But even going forward, there are all sorts of other problems. For example, the verification, yes, the verification is very tight on the known aspects of the Iranian nuclear program, on what we know Iran already has. But the problem with the Iranian nuclear program always has been things that are hidden, which they have not revealed. And so there is always a suspicion that they have a covert program that's parallel and that we don't know about. So to do that, we needed somewhat stricter verification protocols. And as of now, what we have is a protocol by which if IAEA has a suspicion about a particular activity or a particular site or a particular factory or anything of that nature, they have to go through a long process that could last as long as a month or 3 weeks or more than 3 weeks before they gain some resolution. And so in a sense, obviously that defeats the very purpose of these kinds of verification. Similarly, there is this whole issue of the snapback prospect, which is basically that if Iran violates, the sanctions will snap back. But that again has to go back to the UN Security Council, where China and Russia have to come on board. So there are all sorts of problems with the way this has been. This is where the procedures of this agreement. So there is a lot of potential. Now it depends on whether you believe that the Iranian nuclear program from the beginning was purely a civilian program, or whether you think it has some military aspects to it. And I happen to think that there have been military aspects to it. So then that makes it somewhat more difficult. So I think, like I said, it has a lot of potential, it has a lot of promise. But the biggest problem with it is that 15 years down the line, Iran basically has no limits on the number of centrifuges that it can produce, the amount of fissile material that it can hold, and so on. So then we would know then as to what the situation is, because that raises all sorts of problems about
and
what
with the
Iran
sanctions gone, they'll have more
sanctions of course will be gone much before that.
Disposal.
Sanctions will be gone much before that. But so you really would face the real critical issue would be what happens from the year 15 onwards to the year 20, and then we would know what the Iranian nuclear program is actually all about, if it doesn't come to a crisis before. So this is an agreement that kicks the can down the road, doesn't really solve it, but it's for the time being it's sort of at least till December we will know. The first deadline is really December, so we will know by December as to what the situation is.
Ambassador Sharma wants to come in here.
No, I wanted to mention that we should realize the diplomatic importance of what has been done at the highest level. Yesterday in the night, our time, President Obama was there for 68 minutes answering a press conference all by himself. And he was openly asking them, okay, any questions? I'll answer you. And if you were to see that kind of a press conference, it shows the kind of commitment and the preparedness with which the American diplomacy approached this whole thing. And he laid to rest many of the doubts which have been expressed by the critics. And his main point has been that the Iranian nuclear capability has been brought down to the minimum possible. But they will still have this. His main point has been that they have the knowledge. So you cannot rule it out completely. But under the circumstances, he says this is the best deal. And he asks his critics that you tell me what is the alternative.
The alternative was,
And so I thought that one should see it in that larger perspective at a time when non-proliferation and arms control is in pits. Georgy Abatov, who's the head of the Carnegie Moscow, has written a very extensive piece recently where he says that this disarmament and non-proliferation as known to the world, beginning from the limited test ban treaty in 1963, is come to naught today, because no agreement is in operation at the moment. Now, and the NPT review conference, which ended in the month of May, also was not successful. So when the whole situation is so bleak, this accord is a silver lining, and it has been supported at the highest level by the not only US, Putin, despite the problems with Ukraine, he came out spontaneously and supported, and the Putin statement is also very lengthy.
Right.
He spells out the elements. So if you look at it, one should see the larger picture.
The larger picture, and as you're saying, both sides perhaps, you know, they need to be congratulated for their efforts for giving diplomacy a chance. Mr. Kapoor.
I think what has really happened is quite a game changer in certain ways. I don't agree with the submission about Iran maybe making a nuclear bomb 15, 20 years down the line, so they should continue to live in the, under sanctions or all kinds of economic squeeze that they have been subjected to. It's a nation which has really gone through hell over the last many years, the kind of impact embargoes have on the people. And as President Obama said very clearly, it is not a matter of trust, it's a matter of verification.
Right.
I think a regime has been put in place, especially the deal which we are referring to, where I think where detailed verification is being brought in. Ambassador Shilkan Sharma has talked about it in great detail with great eloquence about it. And it is important that a country should be given a chance to get mainstream, come back to in a certain way in the global order. For quite a while they've been treated as if it's a criminal state, and precedence was being given to the noises which are emanating from Israel, which is still continue even today. In fact, the Prime Minister is willing to give up his life to defend the Israeli cause. So this kind of hysteria has contributed in sullying the reputation of the Persian Iranian people, which I think is rather misplaced, and also aggravating the situation in that region. So from that standpoint, I think it is quite a game changer.
And what happens next now? I'm talking about the hitches or rather the hurdles that the deal is going to face in the US Congress.
If you watch any of the American TV channels and read all the reports that are coming in, most of the Republicans are getting extremely hysterical, and even the Israeli foreign minister is supposed to travel there, drum up support against the deal. And in case if the Congress decides to go against the deal,